Everybody, Kofuku's back, and today I'm going to be talking about the minimum wage and why the conservative and libertarian idea that competition will compensate for the wage or that certain jobs aren't worth a living wage are what I'm going to be talking about. So, the libertarian idea, we'll start with that they believe competition will make wages higher, that people will just refuse to work for less. But even with a minimum setting for wages, that's already not the case, for one, because of one problem. There's more people looking for a job than there are jobs available. And that makes an issue where they don't have to compete, because people will take what they can get. Especially when you think about other concerns like distance. Some people can't afford to go 20 miles to get a job that pays $7.50 an hour. It's not practical. Costs more in gas than you earn. Or if you work part-time. If you work part-time, then there's not enough hours to get you the money you need either way. Then there's the other argument of it damaging employment, and this holds a little bit more ground because unemployment will probably go up a little. Whether it's a devastating amount or whether at all is devastating is to be argued about, but there's a certain point at which what's better? 100% employment at $3 an hour? Or is it better to have 80% employment at $11 an hour? This is the begging question. Government assistance programs, which cost the taxpayers money, is paying for these low wages. It's subsidizing them. If you are living on your own at minimum wage, even just a single bedroom apartment, you are likely on government assistance while working full time. And that's a major problem. If you are working, you should be able to afford some sort of existence. Now, if you're working part-time at minimum wage, obviously you're not going to afford anything. But full-time workers making minimum, because that's the only job in their area that they could get, and they don't have a right to pay their bills. Now let's move on to the Republican argument that minimum wage jobs are not meant for people who are supporting themselves. And, you could argue that all you want, but the minimum wage was written into law by FDR. And FDR says that no business that relies on paying its workers less than a living wage has any right to exist in this country. That's what was said when the law was written. Which means no matter your opinion of whether those jobs should be or shouldn't be, that's what the law says. That's the point of the law. That any job, when worked full-time, should be a living wage. And then at that point, when they've already lost that part of the argument, they'll move on to saying, well, a living wage is just enough to get by. And that's also, again, not what FDR said when he wrote the law. FDR said, when he wrote the law, that by a living wage, he means the wages of a good living, not just a bare subsistence level. One more reason competition doesn't work on employment, apart from the abundance of workers to fill those jobs, is that businesses are also competing with each other. And in competing with each other, they're trying to cut costs. Costs like employment. Which means they're trying to balance incentivizing people working for them versus making money to beat the competition in the business. And when you put those together, they're competing values, and the one that they can get away with is the one that's going to suffer, which is wages. When someone pays you minimum wage, what they're saying is, I would pay you less if I could. And that's an issue. We're talking about people dedicating 40 to 60 hours a week of their lives to advancing a business that they're not going to see returns from at all. They have no stake in the company. The minimum that should be asked for is simply getting paid adequately for their time. Time is the most valuable resource in existence today. Anyone who's devoting a third of their life to work should be able to pay rent and to eat without government assistance and without this stigma that poor people deserve less. Now, let's talk about how it's not nearly as dire as the conservatives would have you believe. The big thing is that when you put more buying power in the lower and middle class, what happens? Well, it's very simple. They spend more money. When they spend more money, businesses make more money because now their customers can afford some of those luxuries. They can afford to go to your restaurant. They can afford to buy your t-shirt. They can afford better tools for what they need. And when they can do that, not only does it help your business, it gets them out of barely existing to a point that maybe they can invest back in themselves. Maybe they can then go to college because they have the money to do so. Or they can then get the training they need because they're not worried about putting food on the table. Then they can move up in the class, and then they can get that business loan and start a business of their own as well. It gives the opportunity for class movement, from poor to middle class, from middle class to upper class, from barely existing to being able to create jobs. This is a major difference. And then finally, there's the argument that it would just increase the cost of living. Increasing the wage will increase prices, and those increased prices mean the value of the dollar goes down, inflation. But the truth of the matter is, inflation goes up regardless of the change in wages. Inflation just rises because of the national debt. The cost of living wouldn't change that much especially for larger businesses. There was a study done that said if Wal-mart increased the price of every single thing in the store by a few cents, that they could pay every employee $15 an hour. That increased buying power of the lower and middle classes is much more than the 1 to 5% of cost increases to the cost of living. So it's still very beneficial, even at slight costs, and the potential to increase unemployment by 1% or 2%. It matters that everyone who is working is making enough. And then that saves those government assistance programs for those without. The working poor should not be a title in this country. If you are working, you shouldn't be poor unless you're a moron. And unfortunately, that's the way the right wing tends to see the working poor, that, oh, they're just stupid. You just need to cut your morning coffee from Starbucks out. A majority of people aren't doing that. They're trying to have enough money to buy the things they need. They know they're not buying luxuries. It's just this horrible straw man that there's a horrible message in this country that just working hard and being good with a budget, you can make any wage work. You can't. At a certain point, there's less money than there is bills. And there's a certain point at which those cuts make life miserable. A lot of the right wing gets so offended when they see a poor person have something nice, whether they saved for it or not, whether it was a gift or not, whether they have any idea of anything that this family's going through. Then there's the absolute stupidest argument I see from the right wing, and that is to sell things you have to make ends meet. Well, here's the problem with that. If you sell something to pay your bills, that means you didn't have enough money to pay your bills, which means you are running negative. You have more bills than you have money. And selling something or taking out like a payday loan that pays that month, but it doesn't change that you're still negative. And you're going to run out of things to just sell. It doesn't do you any good to sell your phone for $100 to pay the bill. Now you don't have a phone, and next month you're going to be short again. Or even worse with the payday loans, you get interest, which now you're even shorter than last month. It's a cycle. There's just isn't enough money to pay the bills. No amount of budgeting is going to change that. No amount of cutting is going to change that there's not enough money to pay the bills. And when there's not enough money to pay the bills, there's no money to invest back in the economy, which causes the overall decline of the economy. It doesn't matter how many rich people there are making billions after they've built their company. It doesn't matter. It doesn't create more jobs. What creates the money that fuels businesses is the customers, and the customers are lower to middle class. And if those classes don't have enough power to invest back in the economy, it holds the whole thing back. This has been Kofuku, signing out.